Well, for more tonight, I'm joined now by Andrew Ullman. He is a member of the German parliament for the business-friendly FDP party. He also happens to be a medical doctor by training. Dr. Ullman, it's good to have you on the day again. Why was this legislation needed? Decisions by the government restricting personal freedoms, closing stores, etc., are they on the verge of being unconstitutional?
I wouldn't go that far yet. We needed this debate in the parliament. It was overdue. And this is how democracy works in Germany. We have the legislation power and also the executive power, and we control each other. And that's why it was important that we had the debate. It didn't happen for a very long time in our parliament. And honestly, I do not really see so far that personal freedom is eroded. The major problem is the acceptance of the rulings. And so far, these rulings were done without parliamentarian power, and that was necessary today, even though I do not agree with all the laws that were passed today.
The legislation that was passed addresses the current situation, the current pandemic. Do you think that it will make it easier for future governments to react when and if another pandemic occurs?
I don't think so, because this law passed very quickly. This was important that it was passed very quickly. However, we from the opposition had a lot of critics on the law, and as the Free Democrats also brought in a new motion with a different law that was more thoroughly written and clear-cut, actually looking at the different stages of a pandemic and how to react to that pandemic. Because the situation that we're facing here so far is that there's a majority of course, accepting those rules, but a lot of those rulings are not very logical and doesn't really make sense. And this has to be debated again and again, of course. And I'm not quite sure if this is going to stand by the constitutional courts here in Germany.
So you're saying the legislation passed today may not stand up if it's challenged before the Constitutional Court?
There's a possibility that could happen. It's not saying that's quite unconstitutional, but there's a lot of lacking points in the law because the government needs to explain their ruling and also has to and bring this into the parliament. And so far, it's just passed a bill and said these are the rulings that we're going to do, period. And that is not good enough, and we have to be more precise in those laws.
Well, could you tell me what is the one thing about this legislation that needs to be changed? What would you change?
Well, first of all, I would really change what has to be done in a different situation. A pandemic starts off where you have to prevent an infection. And these are, of course, those rules that we know about, this physical distancing, wearing masks in the public, especially in public transportation or in buildings, open buildings. Then the next step is when the pandemic is quickly arising, the number of infections are increasingly very strongly, then stronger measures have to be made. And that is what's missing in this legislation, that the connection between what is happening and what has to be done is not there. It just says if there's a pandemic situation, these are the things that we have to do, and that is not clear-cut enough.
Before we run out of time, Dr. Ullman, let me get your reaction to the news that Pfizer and BioNTech have successfully ended the late-stage trials for their coronavirus vaccine. I mean, that's wonderful news, isn't it?
Oh, this is really wonderful news. Today, the press release by BioNTech and Pfizer is very promising. I was still skeptical a week ago when we weren't so sure if the effect of that vaccine goes through all age groups. This was in the press release today that it goes through the age groups, the effectiveness of the vaccine of 95%. Now I'm awaiting the primary publication of that data. And secondly, I do hope it's not only put into the FDA filing, it's also put in the EMA filing here for Europe, so that we might have a new vaccine by March of next year.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. Pfizer says that it plans to ask the FDA and the U.S. for emergency approval as soon as this week. When do you expect the request for approval here in Europe? When is that request going to come?
Well, I hope as soon as possible, of course, because we are in a similar situation as in North America. And BioNTech is a company here in Germany in cooperation with Pfizer in the US. And I do hope, I asked the company today, I didn't get any information about from them so far, if they're going to file soon here in Europe, because the filing situation is pretty much similar between the US and in Europe.
Okay. Dr. Andrew Ullman, member of the German Parliament. Dr. Ullman, we appreciate your time and your insights tonight. Thank you.
Thank you for having me again.